Tom Hanks raised his hand mid-sentence and said one word. Stop. Jimmy Fallon had interviewed thousands of guests over 15 years. He'd laughed with presidents, danced with pop stars, played games with Oscar winners. But he had never experienced anything like this. The studio fell silent. The band stopped. The audience held its breath. Tom Hanks, America's most beloved actor, the man who never broke character, who always had a smile ready, was sitting in that guest chair with tears forming in his eyes. And Jimmy Fallon, the host who built his career on keeping things light, on making people laugh even in dark times, didn't know what to do. His smile froze. His hands gripped the edge of his desk. Because something had just happened that no script, no producer, no amount of preparation could have predicted. A single name had been spoken. And it changed everything. If you want to understand how a moment of unexpected humanity can transform an entire show, and why what happened next became one of the most powerful segments in late-night television history, stay with us. Because this story is just beginning. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. The Tonight Show tape nights usually follow a rhythm. There's an energy, a flow that Jimmy Fallon and his team have perfected over thousands of episodes. The monologue, the bits, the games, the interviews. Everything timed to the second. The audience laughs on cue, the band plays the transitions, the guests tell their stories. It's controlled chaos that looks effortless on camera. That Tuesday night started like any other. Jimmy walked out to thunderous applause, did his monologue, played a game with a surprise guest. The energy was high. The show was running perfectly. And then it was time for the main interview. Tom Hanks. The announcement alone got a standing ovation. Tom walked out with that signature smile, waving to the crowd, hugging Jimmy. They'd done this dance dozens of times before. Old friends. Easy chemistry. The kind of interview that practically writes itself. They started talking about Tom's new project, sharing behind-the-scenes stories, laughing about old times. Jimmy asked about Tom's early career, about the roles that shaped him, about the people who influenced his path. Standard questions. Comfortable territory. Tom was in his element, telling stories the way only he can, with that warmth and wit that made him America's dad. And then Jimmy, going through his prepared questions, mentioned a name. Just a name. A reference to someone Tom had worked with decades ago. A cinematographer from one of his early films. Someone most viewers wouldn't recognize. Someone who, according to the research, had been a mentor figure in Tom's early Hollywood days. Jimmy said the name casually, moving toward his next question. But he never got there. Tom Hanks stopped mid-sentence. The entire studio froze. Tom's hand came up slowly, palm facing Jimmy. Not aggressive, not dramatic. Just a stop sign. A gentle but absolute gesture that said, wait. Jimmy's smile faltered. His eyes went from his note cards to Tom's face. And what he saw there made him forget every question he'd prepared. Tom Hanks was crying. Not sobbing, not making a scene. Just quiet tears forming in his eyes, his jaw tight, his breath careful and controlled. The kind of emotion you see in someone who's trying very hard to hold something together but can't quite manage it. The audience didn't know how to react. A few uncertain laughs died out immediately. The Roots, Jimmy's band, went completely still. The cameras kept rolling, but you could feel the uncertainty behind them. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't part of the plan. Jimmy Fallon did something then that revealed why he's more than just a comedian who laughs at his own jokes. He didn't try to joke his way out of the moment. He didn't rush to commercial. He didn't panic. He put down his note cards. Slowly. Deliberately. He leaned forward, his elbows on his desk, and he waited. He gave Tom space. He gave him silence. He gave him respect. "I'm sorry," Tom finally said, his voice rough. I haven't heard that name in a long time." Jimmy nodded. He didn't fill the silence with platitudes. He just nodded and waited. Tom took a breath. "Can I tell you about him?" "Of course." Jimmy said quietly. Take your time. Behind the scenes, producers were making a decision that defied every expectation. They weren't cutting. They weren't going to commercial. They were letting this moment breathe. What Tom Hanks revealed in the next few minutes wasn't about Hollywood glamour or celebrity stories. It was about a man named Robert Chin, a cinematographer who had worked on one of Tom's earliest films, back when Tom was nobody, just another struggling actor trying to make it in Los Angeles. Robert had taken Tom under his wing, not in any formal mentorship way, but in small, consistent acts of kindness. He'd give Tom rides home after long shoots. He'd invite him to crew dinners when Tom couldn't afford to eat out. He'd talk to him about craft, about storytelling, about seeing the world through a lens. But more than that, Robert had believed in Tom when Tom didn't believe in himself. During a particularly difficult shoot, when Tom was convinced he wasn't good enough, that he'd made a mistake choosing this career, Robert had pulled him aside. He told Tom something that stuck with him for decades. You have a gift for making people feel less alone. Don't waste it on doubt. Tom had carried those words through his entire career. Through every role, every performance, every moment in front of a camera. Make people feel less alone. That became his compass. Robert Chin died 15 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. Tom had been filming in Australia when he got the news. He couldn't make it back in time for the funeral. He'd carried guilt about that for years. And somehow, in the chaos of career and life in constant motion, Robert's name had faded into the background of memory. Not forgotten, but not spoken. Not honored the way Tom felt he should be honored. Until Jimmy Fallon, reading from a researcher's note card, brought him back into the room. The studio audience was completely silent now. Some people were crying. Not from sadness, but from the raw honesty of what they were witnessing. This wasn't entertainment. This was human connection. This was grief and gratitude and memory all tangled together in real time. Jimmy Fallon made another choice then. He stood up from behind his desk. He walked around to where Tom was sitting. And he did something he'd never done in 15 years of hosting. He pulled up a chair and sat next to his guest. Not across from him. Next to him. Two people sharing space, not performing for cameras. Tell me more about him, Jimmy said. And Tom did. He talked about Robert's laugh, his terrible jokes, his obsession with lighting, the way he'd frame shots to make actors look like heroes even when they felt like frauds. He talked about Robert's family, his kids, his wife who loved him despite his impossible work hours. He talked about a man who had touched his life in profound ways, but whose name most people would never know. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. While Tom was talking, while the cameras were focused on this intimate conversation between two men sitting side by side, something was happening in the audience. People were pulling out their phones. Not to record or take selfies, but to look someone up. To search for Robert Chin. To find out about this cinematographer whose work had touched one of the greatest actors of our generation. And when Tom finished talking, when he wiped his eyes and smiled that sad, grateful smile, someone in the audience started clapping. Then another. Then another. And then the entire studio was on its feet, applauding not for a performance, not for entertainment, but for a man they'd never met. For Robert Chin. For his life. For his impact. For being remembered. Jimmy Fallon stood with them. He was crying too now. Not hiding it, not embarrassed by it. Just present in the moment, fully human, fully there. Tom stood up, overwhelmed. He put his hand on Jimmy's shoulder, squeezed once, and nodded. Thank you? For the space. For the respect. For letting this happen. When the applause finally died down, when everyone sat back down, Jimmy didn't go back behind his desk. He stayed next to Tom. And he said something that would become one of the most quoted moments in tonight's show history. We spend so much time trying to be funny, trying to be entertaining, trying to give people a break from their lives. But sometimes the most important thing we can do is just remember. Remember the people who shaped us. Honor the ones who believed in us before anyone else did. Thank you for trusting us with that. Tom nodded. Thank you for letting me. They sat there for another moment, just two humans sharing space. Then Jimmy squeezed Tom's shoulder, stood up, and the show continued. But it was different now. The energy had shifted. Something profound had happened, and everyone in that room knew it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Jimmy asked his team not to edit that segment. He wanted it to air exactly as it happened, raw and real and unpolished. The next day, that segment went viral. Not because it was shocking, but because it was honest. People shared it with captions like, "This is why we need more moments like this," and "Real emotion on live TV." Robert Chen's family reached out to the show. They wanted to thank Tom for remembering their father. They shared photos and stories. Robert had kept a photograph of young Tom Hanks on his desk until the day he died, proud of the career he'd watched unfold. Jimmy arranged for Tom to meet with Robert's family. They spent an afternoon sharing stories and old photographs. Tom gave them a framed photograph from that early film with a note. "Robert Chen taught me to make people feel less alone. I've spent my career trying to honor that lesson." That photograph now hangs in Robert Chen's widow's living room. And every time someone asks about it, she tells them the story. Not just about Tom Hanks the actor, but about Tom Hanks the human. About Jimmy Fallon the host who knew when to stop performing and start listening. About a moment on late-night television that reminded millions of people that behind every success story are the quiet heroes who believed first. Jimmy Fallon learned something that night too. He'd always known his job was to entertain, to make people laugh, to provide escape. But that night with Tom Hanks taught him that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is create space for truth. For grief. For gratitude. For memory. In interviews after that episode, Jimmy would often reference that night. "Tom Hanks trusted me with something precious," he'd say. "He trusted me with his grief, with his gratitude, with a memory that mattered deeply to him. And the best thing I could do was get out of the way and let it happen." That's leadership. Not commanding attention, but knowing when to surrender it. Not filling every silence, but understanding that some silences hold more meaning than words. Not performing emotion, but allowing it to exist without judgment or manipulation. The Tonight Show continued, of course. More guests, more laughs, more games, more monologues. But that episode with Tom Hanks became a touchstone, a reminder of what the show could be when it stripped away all the production and just focused on connection. Years later, when Jimmy Fallon looks back on his career, when he thinks about the moments that mattered most, that night with Tom Hanks is at the top of the list. Not because it got great ratings, though it did. Not because it went viral, though it did. But because it was real. Because in an industry built on performance and illusion, two people sat together and honored someone who deserved to be remembered. Robert Chen never became famous. His name doesn't appear in history books or awards shows. But his impact ripples through every performance Tom Hanks has given since those early days. Through every role where Tom made audiences feel less alone. Through every character who became a friend to millions of viewers. Through every moment of grace and humanity that Tom brought to the screen. And now, because of one unscripted moment on The Tonight Show, because Jimmy Fallon knew when to stop performing and start listening, Robert Chen's legacy lives beyond his immediate circle. His lesson, make people feel less alone, has been passed on to millions. His kindness, his belief, his quiet mentorship has been honored in the most public way possible. That's the power of authentic human connection. That's what happens when we create space for truth instead of filling every moment with noise. That's what Jimmy Fallon understood that night, and what he continues to understand every time he sits behind that desk. The show must go on, yes. But sometimes, the most important thing the show can do is stop. Stop performing. Stop entertaining. Stop filling space. Just stop, and let humanity speak for itself. That night, Tom Hanks reminded Jimmy, and reminded all of us, that the people who shaped us deserve to be remembered. And Jimmy Fallon created the space for that remembering to happen. That's not just good television. That's good humanity. And in a world that often feels dominated by performance and pretense, moments like these matter more than we can measure. They remind us that behind every success story, behind every famous face, behind every achievement, there are the Robert Chens of the world. The quiet believers. The steady supporters. The ones who see potential before anyone else does. This story isn't about celebrity or fame. It's about gratitude. It's about memory. It's about two men sitting together and honoring someone who deserved to be honored. It's about a host who knew that sometimes the best thing you can do is get out of the way and let truth have its moment. And it's about all of us, really. Because we all have our Robert Chens. We all have people who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. People who gave us rides when we couldn't afford gas. People who invited us to dinners we couldn't pay for. People who told us we had gifts worth developing and shouldn't waste them on doubt. This story is a reminder to honor those people. To speak their names. To tell their stories. To make sure their impact doesn't fade into the background of memory, but lives on in the lives they touched. Jimmy Fallon gave us that gift that night. He gave us permission to remember. To grieve. To be grateful. To honor the quiet heroes in our own stories. And that's why this moment matters. That's why it resonated with millions. That's why it continues to circulate years later. Because it wasn't about entertainment. It was about truth. And truth, when given space to breathe, is the most powerful force we have.